In the previous episode, Bonnie and Katherine reached an agreement. Bonnie would use Silas's immortality and invincibility in exchange for the tombstone Katherine had taken from the island. Bonnie cast a spell to bring some of the ghosts back to town. At Jeremy's grave, Cole nearly killed Elena, but Jeremy appeared just in time to save her. Elena finally regained her humanity. Bonnie then used magic to turn Silas into stone, but when it came time to close the veil to the other side, she changed her mind, hoping to bring Jeremy back to life. The story picks up right where the last episode left off. Because Bonnie insisted on resurrecting Jeremy despite her grandmother's warnings, she collapsed immediately after casting the spell. Whether or not Jeremy came back to life remained uncertain, but the all-important task of closing the veil had to be postponed. 3 vampire hunters banded together to seek revenge. Even though they were dead, they still remembered their duty to kill Silas. When Bonnie woke up, her grandmother looked at her with regret and told her that the burden of the spell had been too much. Bonnie was confused. Did she fail? Her grandmother stepped aside, revealing Bonnie's own body still lying lifeless on the ground.
Oh my God. I'm dead.
Since Bonnie had opened the doorway to the other side, deceased enemies began returning to the living world. The original vampire Cole rallied all the vengeful spirits for a war council. Meanwhile, Bonnie had exhausted all of her magic and died. Now, she could only rely on the power of tonight's full moon to close the veil. Bonnie hid the truth about her death, hoping that Caroline would cancel today's graduation ceremony. But Caroline insisted that Bonnie attend. Her grandmother also encouraged Bonnie to go, wanting her to say goodbye to her friends without any regrets. Bonnie's failure to close the doorway to the other side on time raised Damon's suspicion something had definitely gone wrong, but Stefan was too busy drinking with Lexi to notice. The Salvatore brothers had no idea that the town was facing multiple threats. In addition to Cole's revenge squad, the real problem came in the form of 3 vampire hunters: Alexander, Connor, and Galen. Alexander captured Matt to use him as leverage against Rebecca. Connor arrives at the bar and threatens Elena with the innocent villagers. Galen stormed into the Salvatore brothers' mansion, catching Damon completely off guard.
We want Silas, and we want the cure.
The bar, however, was Alaric's territory, and he arrived in a flash. Connor assumed Alaric was just a nobody, especially since he was rigged with explosives and brimming with confidence. What he didn't realize was that Alaric was an original-level vampire. In a split second, Alaric seized Connor and whisked him away, sparing the innocent villagers from harm. Matt stood on a landmine, surrounded by several bombs. Even if Rebecca used her speed, she could not safely take Matt away, so Alexander was unafraid. Galen was reminiscing with Damon when suddenly, he felt a chill in his chest. Stefan had reached in and ripped out his heart. Galen's resurrection was only a matter of time. To avoid any more complications, Damon wants Elena to take the antidote first as his graduation present. Although Elena had fully regained her humanity, she no longer wished to become human again, and her sire bond to Damon had broken. Stefan chose to step back, not wanting to influence Elena's decision. In the past, his insistence was driven by some selfish desires. Now, Stefan had come to terms with everything and wanted Elena to make her own choice. At that moment, Galen was resurrected once again. After all, he was already dead. Meanwhile, Elena noticed Damon's gunshot wound. It turned out that Galen's bullets were coated with werewolf venom. With Klaus away from town, the only way to save Damon was the cure. If Damon became human, the werewolf venom would no longer affect him. However, Damon refused to take it. Even if he became human, how could they possibly deal with the 3 immortal vampire hunters? So Damon handed the cure to Galen and offered to take him to Silas's body. Damon then led Galen to the lakeside, claiming that Silas's body was somewhere here. Galen frowned. This was like searching for a needle in a haystack. To stall for time, Damon even began giving Galen instructions on how to fish for the body. Galen soon realized that Damon was playing him for a fool.
As dumb as you sound.
Elsewhere, with the graduation ceremony approaching, Rebecca took the initiative to kiss Matt and then stepped onto the landmine in his place. She wanted Matt to live out the dream that she herself could not. Once Matt had run far enough away, Rebecca detonated the explosives. At the graduation ceremony, Caroline, Bonnie, Matt, Elena, and Stefan gathered together. For this moment, there were people behind each of them who had silently sacrificed for their happiness. Due to the open doorway to the other side, with ghosts now having physical forms, no one could see through Bonnie's situation. Caroline began to excitedly talk about their future college life. Watching everyone's smiles, Bonnie was both happy and a little sad this was as far as she could go with them. The graduation ceremony was being led by Bonnie's father, Mayor Rudy. Receiving her father's acknowledgement and a hug eased some of Bonnie's regrets, but beneath the appearance of joy, danger lurked everywhere. Cole's revenge squad hid among the crowd, and he threatened Bonnie to fully open the veil to the other side. Not just the town, or else there would be a massacre. Bonnie pretended to agree and led Cole to the school's boiler room, where her body was hidden. It was then that Cole realized the Bonnie standing before him was also a ghost.
I want to stay here, Cole. More than anything.
And what are we waiting for? Let's do it together.
Bonnie cast a spell to trap Cole in a boundary. With each bullet Damon took, the amount of werewolf venom in his system increased, speeding up the time before the venom took full effect. Luckily, Alaric arrived just in time, not only dealing with Galen but also managing to steal the cure. Alaric originally wanted to use the antidote to cure Damon, but Damon adamantly refused to take it, preferring to die and leaving the antidote for Elena. The few people at the school who heard the news were thrown into a panic, as Caroline couldn't get Klaus on the phone. At that moment, the witches' ghosts came out to wreak havoc, and Caroline and the others were no match for them. Klaus arrived like a hero in Mystic Falls to help. Not only did he intimidate the ghosts, but he also managed to save Damon's life. Klaus single-handedly resolved the town's crisis. As night fell, the veil to the other side was about to close, and everyone was busy saying their goodbyes. Elena wanted to give the antidote to Stefan. She was very grateful for everything Stefan had done for her, from the cure to her thankfulness. It sent a signal that Elena might choose Damon. Stefan forced a smile as he took the cure. He was about to make one last attempt to win her back, but Elena spoke up first.
You deserve whatever you want out of life. You deserve this.
Klaus, who had returned from New Orleans, seemed to have undergone a transformation, no longer filled with rage. He explained that he had already been on his way after receiving Caroline's plea for help. There was no way he could miss Caroline's graduation ceremony. Klaus hoped that Caroline would come with him to New Orleans, but he knew what her decision would be, so he gave her a gift she had always wanted. Caroline was filled with anticipation for Klaus's gift. Amidst her surprise, there was a hint of subtle sadness. She thought Klaus had already let her go. Klaus explained that he had already lost the chance to be Caroline's first love.
I intend to be your last. However long it takes.
But vampires live forever, and Klaus's promise was not an empty one. He intended to be Caroline's last love. Elena stormed in to confront Damon, demanding to know why he refused to take the cure, even if it meant dying. Damon, ever stubborn, retorted that she shouldn't expect an apology because he was simply a selfish person. Although Damon criticized himself, every word still revealed his love for Elena. Elena stepped closer and confessed that she would never admit her mistakes either.
I'm not sorry that I met you. I'm not sorry that knowing you has made me question everything. That in death, you're the one that made me feel most alive.
At last, they were together without any more barriers between them. In the next room, Stefan overheard their declarations of love. To escape the feeling of heartbreak, he decided to go deal with Silas's body. It turned out the body had been in the trunk all along. Damon offered to help, but Stefan refused. Stefan then voiced his true feelings.
I'm not happy about Elena. I'm not happy for you either.
For Damon to earn Stefan's acceptance was no small feat. Bonnie began setting up the spell to close the doorway to the other side. With Jeremy by her side, Alaric sought out Damon to entrust him with looking after Elena. Even though they weren't blood-related, he saw her as his own. Damon is in a happy mood. He poured a glass of wine for Alaric, but the next second Alaric was gone. While on the road, Lexi comforted Stefan, encouraging him to move on and start anew. When Stefan turned his head again, the passenger seat was empty. As Elena searched for Bonnie, she accidentally stumbled into the boundary that trapped Cole. Just as he lunged at Elena, his spirit was pulled back into the other side. But Elena had barely breathed a sigh of relief when Katherine suddenly appeared. In the tunnels, before completely sealing the veil, Bonnie shared a passionate kiss with Jeremy. Then, a force abruptly separated them. Jeremy gasped for breath like a man revived from the brink of death. Bonnie cried out in surprise. It had worked. She had used dark magic to sacrifice herself. But in doing so, she had brought Jeremy back to life. Jeremy, overjoyed, rushed forward to embrace Bonnie. But this time, he couldn't feel her touch because Bonnie was already dead. The only reason Jeremy could see Bonnie was that he now had the ability to see ghosts, an ability gained from his two near-death experiences. Bonnie asked Jeremy to lie for her. telling their friends that she was going on vacation and wouldn't be back all summer. She didn't want them to mourn. Jeremy watched as Bonnie and her grandmother departed. After her resurrection, Rebecca immediately sought out Matt, but to her surprise, he rejected her.
You and I, this isn't gonna work. I need to keep my love life a low vampire zone too, okay?
Of course.
Rebecca is about to leave when she gets a surprise. Matt tells her that he doesn't want to go to college and wants to travel with her. Elsewhere, Elena and Katherine finally faced off in a decisive showdown. The immortality Bonnie had once promised Katherine had turned into nothing. Unable to defeat Bonnie, Katherine vented her fury on Elena. At first, they seemed evenly matched, but Katherine, being a 500-year-old vampire, soon gained the upper hand. As Elena began to lose consciousness, a flashback of her conversation with Stefan played in her mind. It turned out that Stefan had ultimately refused the cure and had placed it back in Elena's hands. As Katherine straddled Elena, ready to rip out her heart, Elena suddenly shoved the cure into Katherine's mouth. The cure, desired by so many, ended up being taken by the one person who least wanted to become human again. Elena's move was a masterstroke. Stefan went to the falls to dispose of the body, only to find that inside the shroud was nothing but shattered plaster. Silas's real body was gone. Just then, he heard Katherine's voice behind him. "Stop searching. I'm right here." Stefan was in disbelief. "You were turned to stone. How could the spell have been broken?" Silas explained. "The moment Bonnie died, I was freed from the seal." Stefan was even more confused. Bonnie was dead? Silas was smug and made it clear that he no longer intended to hide in the shadows. From now on, he would show his true face. It turned out that when he became immortal 2,000 years ago, nature had to find a balance by creating doppelgangers to die in his place. Doppelgangers were the shadow of the immortal. Stefan was shaken to his core. Did this mean that Katherine and Elena were merely shadows of Silas?
You're another one of them.
Not exactly.
Hello, my shadow self.
Stefan was also a doppelganger. He was Silas's shadow. As Stefan stood there in shock, Silas stabbed him in the abdomen. The very safe meant to contain Silas was now being used to imprison Stefan. After dumping Stefan's body in the lake, Silas planned to integrate himself into the town by assuming Stefan's identity. Jeremy hid Bonnie's death, and the ghost and the human played out a love story. Matt and Rebecca traveled the world together, living a joyful life. Caroline continued waiting for Tyler to return, but there was no news from him. As a human, Katherine now lived in constant fear, having made countless enemies over the centuries. The fall from being a cunning queen to a powerless, fragile woman was indeed a jarring change. Elena often stares at the name Stefan in the address book, but she never has the courage to call. She assumed that Stefan had moved on to a new life, unaware that he was actually teetering on the edge between life and death. Elena and Caroline stepped onto their college campus, while Jeremy remained under Damon's care. The moment Elena left, Damon's expression changed completely.
Yeah, no, we're not doing this. Go to school.
During their time settling in, Elena and Caroline kept expecting Bonnie to show up. Bonnie was indeed with them, but they just couldn't see her. When they arrived at the dorm, they found that their roommate wasn't Bonnie but a girl named Megan. To conceal her death, Bonnie had Jeremy continue crafting lies on her behalf. The new roommate made Elena and Caroline uncomfortable. They could no longer freely drink blood. When Damon found out, he suggested hypnotizing Megan to make her move out, but Elena refused to use her vampire privileges. She wanted to live a normal life. There are joys and sorrows. While Elena was on the phone with Damon, Katherine appeared at his door, looking disheveled, her hair messy and her eyes filled with sorrow. All of this was thanks to Elena. Damon looked at her with disdain. He thought Katherine had come to ask him to turn her back into a vampire, but Katherine had always valued her life above all else. As the first vampire to take the cure, she wasn't sure she could survive a transformation. Katherine asked Damon to protect her. In the end, Damon's heart softened. Meanwhile, Silas, posing as Stefan, returned to town. As an immortal, Silas also relied on human blood to sustain his strength, but unlike vampires, he had no fangs or super speed. However, his compulsion and mind-reading abilities were far more powerful than any vampires. Silas revealed his identity to Sheriff Forbes and requested a cup of fresh blood to quench his thirst. Strictly speaking, Silas was the true ancestor of vampires. The original family's existence stemmed from his immortality spell. The original vampires had weaknesses, but Silas's immortality was truly invincible. Not only did Silas erase Sheriff Forbes's memory, but he also healed her wounds. At the bottom of the lake, Stefan awoke again, only to be overwhelmed by the suffocating sensation of drowning. He struggled briefly before losing all strength, and in his final moments, he thought he saw his brother Damon. This was an imagined conversation. Stefan's subconscious was using Damon's voice to persuade him to shut off his humanity. On the other side, Caroline, trying to find fault with their new roommate Megan, deliberately drank from her water bottle, only to discover it was spiked with vervain. Elena and Caroline immediately grew wary. Did Megan know their secret? Fortunately, Caroline's wound healed quickly, allowing her to play it off. However, Caroline developed a paranoid suspicion, fearing that Megan might be a vampire hunter. So, at the first party of the semester, Caroline and Elena declined Megan's invitation. Before long, Megan called, crying for help, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Megan's body fell heavily in front of Caroline and Elena, drained of blood. The killer, too, was a vampire. Silas, disguised as Stefan, returned to town. While Damon was giving Jeremy some advice, Silas showed up. After 3 months apart, Damon deeply missed his brother, not realizing that the Stefan in front of him was actually Silas in disguise. With his mind-reading ability, Silas could seamlessly invade Damon's thoughts and access his memories. It was through this that he learned about Damon sheltering Katherine. Jeremy also stepped forward to greet him. He liked Stefan more than Damon, but when Silas touched him, Jeremy immediately sensed something was wrong. He had once been drained of blood by Silas, and this Stefan gave him the same chilling feeling. Damon dismissed Jeremy's concerns, believing that Silas was still sealed away. Then Bonnie's ghost appears and warns Jeremy that she is dead and the petrification spell on Silas will definitely be lifted. Jeremy insisted that Stefan was actually Silas, but he couldn't reveal the truth about Bonnie's death. Damon's expression grew solemn, preferring to believe it than not. Silas found Katherine, and the antidote he had been longing for had been taken by this woman. Katherine flirted with Silas and leaned in for a kiss, but Silas suddenly grabbed her by the throat. Katherine, in turn, slashed him with a razor before making her escape. Fortunately, Damon and Jeremy arrived just in time. Damon stayed behind to hold off Silas. Jeremy took Katherine away. Damon assumed that Silas was deliberately mimicking his brother's appearance. Silas explained the matter of doppelganger. Stefan was his shadow, and this was his true form. He offered to reveal Stefan's whereabouts if Damon would hand over Katherine. Damon was tempted. After hearing this, Jeremy tried to bring Katherine back, but she, desperate to protect herself, grabbed the steering wheel. Even as a human, her actions remained swift and ruthless. Jeremy was gravely injured, but Katherine ignored his pleas for help. Bonnie's ghost watched the entire scene unfold, helpless to intervene. Luckily, Damon arrived in time and healed Jeremy with his blood.
Katherine. It's God. I don't care.
In love, Damon had undergone a transformation. He was finally acting like the head of the family. When Matt returned to town, he was surprised when Nadia, a woman he had met during his travels, followed him all the way back. Matt thought love had arrived, but it turned out that Nadia was a witch, and her companion held Matt's head down. As a spell was cast, darkness filled Matt's eyes. Meanwhile, a vampire had appeared at the college, and Elena and Caroline's new roommate, Megan, had been murdered by one. Elena checked Megan's phone and discovered that Megan had known her adoptive father. It seemed that the intended target had been Elena all along. Soon after, Caroline received a call from Tyler. Even though Klaus had pardoned him, Tyler still had no intention of returning to town. He had become the alpha of his pack, and his life was thriving. This news broke Caroline's heart. As the town's end-of-summer party neared its conclusion, the townspeople gathered together, and the mayor took the stage to give a closing speech. Bonnie silently accompanied her father in the crowd. As a ghost, Bonnie moved freely, unbound by any limitations, but to her horror, Silas suddenly took the stage, interrupting Rudy's speech, and compelled him with his powerful hypnosis. Bonnie sensed something terrible was coming. Using the microphone, Silas hypnotized the entire town. His voice reached every corner, turning all who heard it into his puppets.
No one make a sound or move a muscle.
This was the power of the strongest witch. Silas then slit Rudy's throat in front of the crowd, and the entire place fell into a silent stillness. The townspeople's faces showed no emotion. Bonnie let out a heart-wrenching scream, but no one could see or hear her. She was as invisible as air, powerless to change anything. Silas commanded the townspeople to find someone for him. Katherine.
Well, the girl that I'm looking for looks exactly like her.